It's a question that finds you at the strangest times. Not the loud times. Not when you're in the middle of something, doing, deciding, being seen. It's the quiet after. The moment you turn the car off and just sit there, the engine ticking as it cools. The pause between closing a book and reaching for the light. The few seconds after a call ends, the screen dark, and the last words you said are still hanging in the air, and you're not sure if they were the right ones or just the easy ones. That's when it drifts in. Am I proud of the person I'm becoming? It's not a shout. It's more like a note held under the surface. A low hum you only notice when everything else goes quiet. And you let it sit there, not quite answering, just feeling the weight of it. You remember, just the other evening, a message you typed out. Someone had asked how you were. A simple question. And you wrote, "All good here, you?" with a little wave emoji. And you stared at it for a second before hitting send. Not because it was a lie exactly, more because it was a floor, a ground floor of all the possible answers. You could have said you were tired, that the week had folded in on itself in a way you couldn't untangle, that you'd had that moment earlier in the day where you stood in front of an open drawer and just forgot what you were looking for. But you didn't. You sent the wave emoji, and the other person replied with a wave back. And that was the conversation. Complete, polished, a little hollow. And you think about that, how that's become a kind of rhythm. The exchange that says enough to be polite, but nothing that might crack the surface. It's efficient. It's kind in a way. It doesn't put your tiredness in someone else's lap. But there's a part of you, the part that's awake now in this late quiet, that wonders what you're protecting. Or who. Maybe it's them. Maybe it's yourself. The self that doesn't want to explain the drawer moment, the slow drift of the week, because explaining would mean naming it, and naming it would mean it's real, and if it's real, then you'd have to do something about it. So you send the wave emoji, and you become the person who sends the wave emoji. It's not one big thing. That's the strange part. You keep waiting for the moment of clear decision, the fork in the road where you choose one version of yourself over another. But it's never that. It's the small moments. The quiet yes when you mean maybe. The quiet no's when you mean I wish I could. The laugh that came out too loud in the call. The one that covered up the fact you hadn't really been listening, that your mind had wandered to something else, something you were already worrying about. You hear it afterwards, that laugh, echoing in your own ears, and you think, that wasn't me. Or it was. It was just a part of you that knows how to fill the silence, to keep the thing moving, to not let the pause get long enough for anyone to ask the real question. There was a conversation not long ago. You were sitting across from someone, the light coming in a certain way, and they were telling you about something that mattered to them. A shift they were making. A thing they'd decided to stop doing because it was costing them something they couldn't afford to lose anymore. And you listened. You nodded. You made the sounds that say, I hear you, I'm with you. And you were. You were with them. But underneath, there was this other current. A small, quiet recognition that you'd felt that same thing, that same cost, that same slow drain. And you hadn't made the shift. You just adjusted. Learned to carry it differently. Found a new way to lean so it didn't pull as hard. And you didn't say that. You kept it. You let the moment pass and you said something like, that takes a lot of courage, which was true and you meant it and maybe it was enough. But later, alone, you thought about the thing you hadn't said. The parallel. The shared ache. And you wondered if keeping it to yourself was kindness, or if it was just another small retreat. Another step back from the edge of being seen. The person you're becoming, you realize, is someone who holds more. Not just things for others, but things of your own. You hold them closer. You don't lay them out on the table anymore. You used to. You remember that. There was a time when the overflow was natural, when the first thing that came was the truest thing, and you'd say it without the filter, without the beat of hesitation. Now there's always a beat, just a breath, just long enough to decide if it's worth it. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes the cost of putting it out there feels higher than the cost of holding it. But the holding has a cost too. It's a quiet one. It accumulates. It's the weight of all the things you meant to say but didn't, all the drafts you deleted before sending, all the moments where you chose the floor instead of the staircase. And you carry that. You carry it into the next conversation, the next decision, the next small moment where you're asked, implicitly or explicitly, who you are. You think about a message you did send. A while back, not long, you were trying to explain something, a feeling that had been sitting with you, this sense of drift. And you wrote it out carefully, trying to be clear but not too much, honest but not heavy. And the response came back warm, reassuring. The kind of response that says, "You're okay, don't worry." And you felt relief for a moment. And then, weirdly, a kind of disappointment, because the response had smoothed it over, had taken the thing you'd put out there and wrapped it in a blanket and put it away. And you let it. You didn't say, "No, that's not what I meant." You didn't push back into the unsettled part. You accepted the comfort because it was easier, and because maybe the other person needed it to be easier, and because the part of you that had wanted to be understood had already started to shrink back, to say never mind. That's a pattern you notice in the late quiet, the never minds, the times you've let the conversation turn, let the focus shift, let your own thing become small so the room could stay comfortable. It's not that you're not heard. It's that you're heard in a certain way, and you accept that hearing because pushing for more feels like asking for something you're not sure you deserve to ask for. Or maybe it's just that you've gotten good at translating your own language into something more palatable. You take the raw edge and you sand it down. You take the question and you turn it into a statement. You take the ache and you call it tiredness. And you become, slowly, the person who speaks that smooth language, who exists in that palatable version. And it's not false exactly. It's just partial. It's a version. And there are moments when you catch a glimpse of another version, the one that used to be more present, more unpolished, and you feel a small pang. Not regret exactly, more like recognition, like seeing someone across a room you used to know well, and you both know you've changed, but you're not sure who changed more, or if you'd even know how to talk to each other now. There's a habit you have now. You didn't used to have it. You pick up your phone in the small gaps. The waiting for coffee gap. The elevator gap. The moment between tasks. And you scroll, not looking for anything, just moving through it. And it's become such a part of the rhythm that you don't even notice it most of the time. But sometimes you do. You notice the thumb moving, the light, the fragments of other people's lives, other people's thoughts, and you think, I'm filling this space. I'm filling it with noise so I don't have to sit in it. And that space, that pause, used to be where the thinking happened. The kind of thinking that led to the raw messages, the honest conversations, the moments where you turn something over until you understood it. Now you turn it over once, maybe twice, and then you pick up the phone. And the thought sinks back down. And you become someone who lets thoughts sink. It's not all the time. That's what you tell yourself. There are still moments of clarity, of connection, of saying something that lands exactly where you meant it to land. But they're rarer, or they feel rarer. Or maybe they're just the same frequency, and it's your awareness that's changed. You're more aware now of the gap, the space between what you feel and what you show. And the gap is where the pride lives or doesn't. Because being proud of who you're becoming, that would mean closing the gap. Or at least knowing why it's there. Having a reason for it. Purpose. You had a thought not long ago, in one of those moments where you were lying down but not yet sleeping. The thought was, what if the gap isn't protection? What if it's just habit? What if you started closing the gap because it was easier, and then you kept doing it because it was what you knew, and now it's just the shape you fit into? Not chosen, just worn. Like a path in the woods that gets deeper because it's the path, not because it's the best way. And you thought about that, and you didn't pick up your phone. You just lay there and let it sit. And there was something in that, something that felt like the edge of a shift. But then sleep came and the morning came and the path was still there. It's in the small choices, the ones that don't feel like choices because they're so small. The way you answer a question, the way you fill a silence, the way you turn down an invitation with a reason that's not the real reason, but it's close enough and you tell yourself close enough is fine. And it is fine. It's all fine. That's the word that keeps appearing. Fine. Things are fine. You're fine. The wave emoji of the soul. And you're not lying exactly. You are fine. But fine is a room with the walls just a little closer than they used to be. Fine is the temperature you've adjusted to. Fine is the sound of the engine ticking after the drive. And you're not going anywhere else tonight. You think about a moment from a while back. A conversation where someone asked you what you wanted. Not what you wanted to do or what you wanted to happen. Just what you wanted. And you opened your mouth and nothing came out for a second. And then you said something reasonable. Something about balance or time or a project you were working on. And the person nodded. And you moved on. But later you turned it over. The blank. The absence of an answer. Not because you don't want things. You want things, but they've become harder to name. They've become tangled with the things you think you should want, the things that are sensible, the things that fit into the life you've built. And somewhere in the tangle, the clear note of what you actually want has gotten quieter. It's still there. You hear it sometimes, in the late quiet, but it's like a station you're driving past, the signal fading in and out. And you're not sure if you're the one driving away, or if the station itself is moving. There's a particular feeling that comes with it, a kind of soft ache, not sharp, just present. It's the feeling of knowing there's something you're not doing, something you're not saying, something you're not becoming that you once thought you might. And it's not dramatic. It's not a grand dream left behind. It's smaller, more ordinary. It's the version of yourself that would have sent the real message. The one who would have let the conversation go deeper. The one who would have sat with the discomfort instead of reaching for the phone. It's a version that's still you, but you're not sure how to get back to it or if you even want to. Because getting back would mean admitting you left. And admitting you left would mean asking why. And the why is complicated. Or maybe it's simple. Maybe it's just that becoming someone is always a series of small losses alongside the gains. You gain ease. You gain a kind of smoothness. You gain the ability to move through rooms and conversations without leaving a trace of the rough edges. And you lose the texture, the grain, the thing that made you feel like you were touching something real when you touched yourself. Not better or worse, just different. Just a trade you didn't realize you were making until you'd already made it. You catch yourself sometimes in the reflection of a dark window, not looking at your face exactly, just the shape, the outline, and you think that's the person you're becoming. And you can't tell from the outline if you'd be proud or not. There's no expression on the outline, no warmth or coldness. It's just a silhouette. And you fill it in with all the small choices. The wave emoji, the laugh that came out too loud, the draft you deleted, the invitation you turned down with a reason that wasn't the reason, the thing you kept to yourself in the conversation where you could have shared it. And you fill it in and you look and you think that's a person. That's the person. And the question hangs there in the space between you and the reflection. It's not a question that gets answered, you realize. Or maybe it gets answered every day in the small moments, and the answer is just the accumulation. The person you're becoming is the person who made those choices. And you can look at the choices and feel something. Not pride exactly, not its opposite, just a kind of recognition, a knowing. This is what you did. This is what you didn't do. This is what you let slide. This is what you held on to. And you can sit with that in the late quiet without having to put a name to it. You can just let it be there. The weight of it. The shape of it. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being proud isn't the point. Maybe the point is just to be aware. To notice the gap. To see the path you're walking and know that you're the one walking it. Even if you're not sure how you got here. Even if you're not sure where it leads. To feel the small ache and not reach for the phone to fill it. To let the ache be there. To let it be part of the quiet. You think about a moment earlier today. A small thing. You were standing at a counter waiting for something and someone next to you made a comment, just a casual observation, and you had a response ready, the easy one, the one that would keep the exchange light and brief. But you paused, just for a second, and you said something else. Something closer to what you actually thought. And it wasn't a revelation. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was just a sentence. But it landed differently. It landed in the space where you usually put the wave emoji. And the other person paused too. And then they said something that wasn't the easy response either. And the exchange was different. It was a little longer, a little less smooth, a little more real. And you walked away from it and you didn't think about it again until now. Until this quiet. And now you're thinking that maybe that's the shape of it. Not a single moment where you become someone you're proud of. Just a series of small moments where you choose or don't choose to close the gap. To say the thing. To let the silence be. To not smooth it over. And you don't know if you'll make that choice more often. You don't know if the path will shift. But you know that you noticed it. That you felt the difference. And that's something. That's the kind of something that sits with you in the late quiet. Not as an answer, but as a thread. Something to hold on to. And the question fades a little. Not because it's answered, but because it softens. It becomes less of a question and more of a texture. The grain of the quiet. The shape of the dark. And you're still here, in the chair or the bed, or wherever the quiet found you. And the person you're becoming is still becoming. And the gap is still there. And you're aware of it. And maybe that awareness is the closest thing to pride you can feel right now. Just the noticing. Just the not turning away. You let it sit. You let the thread drift. And the quiet gets deeper, and the question hums lower, and you don't need to answer it tonight. You just need to be here in this moment with the shape of it. And that's okay. That's enough for now. The room is still. The light is whatever it is. And you're still here. And the person you're becoming is still here too. Somewhere in the space between the choices you made and the choices you didn't. And you'll wake up tomorrow, and there'll be another moment, another small choice, another chance to close the gap or leave it open. And that's the becoming. That's the whole of it. Just the next thing. And the next. And the quiet in between where you get to sit with it and not run. And the quiet in between where you get to sit with it and not run. That's the part you forget in the daytime. The sitting. The letting things land. The not immediately reaching for the next thing to fill the space. But here, now, in this late hour, the sitting is all there is. And your mind drifts back, not to any specific time, but to a kind of pattern you've carried for longer than you can place. A way of being that has roots you don't fully see. There was a thing you used to do, practice, something you returned to, not every day, but regularly enough that it became a marker. A way of orienting yourself. And you haven't done it in a while. Not because you decided to stop. Just because the days got full and then fuller and the practice became something you'd get back to when things settled. But things never really settled. They just rearranged. And the practice faded into the background, and then into memory, and now it's the kind of thing you think about in the quiet and feel a faint pull toward, but also a faint resistance. Because going back would mean admitting you left. And admitting you left would mean asking why you didn't hold on. You remember the last time you did it. The light was different. The room was arranged differently. You were in a different headspace. And you remember the feeling after, the clarity, the sense of having touched something underneath the surface. And then you remember the next day when you meant to do it again and something came up, or you were tired, or it just felt easier to let it slide. And then another day and another, and the gap between the last time and now has grown so wide that it feels like looking across a distance you're not sure how to cross. It's not just that one thing. It's a pattern that shows up in different forms. The projects you start with a surge of energy, the ones that feel like they'll change something, and then the energy dissipates and the project becomes a folder on your computer, a notebook on the shelf, a half-filled thing you walk past and think, I should get back to that. The habits you initiate with such intention, the morning routine, the evening wind down, the way you wanted to hold your attention, and they hold for a week, 2 weeks, and then one day you skip, and skipping becomes the new pattern, and the intention becomes a ghost you occasionally bump into. And you wonder, in this quiet, if that's part of who you're becoming. Someone who starts but doesn't finish. Someone who intends but doesn't persist. Someone whose energy comes in waves that build and then recede, leaving only the damp sand of what was almost built. And you look at others, not with envy exactly, but with a kind of curiosity. The ones who seem to hold a line, who decide something and then stay inside that decision, day after day, without the drift, without the slow erosion. You wonder what that feels like. You wonder if it's a muscle they've trained, or if it's just a different wiring, a different way of being in time. There was a conversation a while back where someone described how they made a change. They said it simply. They said, I decided, and then I just kept deciding. And you remember the simplicity of it striking you, because your own decisions feel more porous. You decide, and then the decision gets softened by circumstance, by mood, by the 1,000 small invitations to do something else, be something else. And you say yes to those invitations more often than you say no. And you become the person who says yes to the detour, the diversion, the easier path. Not always. Sometimes you hold. There are things you've held for a long time. Relationships, commitments, things that matter in a way that overrides the drift. But you notice in the quiet that the drift seems to win more often than it used to. Or maybe it's always won, and you're just more aware of it now. More aware of the gap between the intention and the follow-through. More aware of the space where persistence would live if you let it. You think about a moment from a while back. You were supposed to send something, a message you'd promised to send. Not a difficult one. Just a follow-up, a small thread to keep connected, and you thought about it several times over several days. You even typed it once, but you got distracted before you hit send, and then you put your phone down, and then you forgot until later, and then it felt like too much time had passed, like sending it now would require an explanation for the delay, and the explanation felt like more than the thing was worth, so you let it go. And the thread stayed loose, and the connection, that small connection, frayed a little more. And that's a pattern too. The letting things go not because they don't matter, but because the effort of picking them back up feels heavier than the cost of letting them drop. And you wonder if that's a kind of calculation you've learned. A way of conserving energy. But conserving for what? For the next thing that will also get dropped? For the wave that will build and recede, leaving the same damp sand? There's a particular kind of hollow that comes with that pattern. It's not loud. It's just there, underneath. The feeling of having less weight in the world than you used to. Of being someone whose presence is lighter, whose imprint fades faster. And there's a freedom in that sometimes, a lightness, a mobility, but there's also a loss of the thing that happens when you stay, when you persist through the drift, when you send the message even after it feels too late, when you go back to the practice even after the gap has grown wide. You think about someone you know, not a close friend, just someone whose path crossed yours in a way that left an impression. They have a quality you notice, a steadiness. They make a plan and they show up. They say they'll do something and they do it. And it's not dramatic. It's just a kind of reliability that has become rare enough to stand out. And you've found yourself more than once comparing your own pattern to theirs. The way your plans shift, your promises soften, your intentions become mights and maybes. And you don't feel bad about it exactly, but you notice. You notice the difference, and you wonder what it would be like to be on the other side of it, to be the one who holds. But you also notice something else, a resistance, a part of you that doesn't want to be that steady, that values the flexibility, the openness to change, the ability to let things go when they no longer fit. And you recognize that this part has its own logic. That being the one who holds can also mean being the one who carries too much, who can't let go when letting go is the right thing. And you wonder if the tension between these two parts, the one that wants to persist and the one that wants to remain fluid, is part of who you're becoming. Not one or the other, but the space between, the negotiation. There was a moment not long ago where you had to choose, two things pulling. One was the responsible path, the one that matched the plans you'd made, the expectations you'd set. The other was something you wanted, something that felt more aligned with a quieter part of yourself, the part that gets overridden more often than not. And you chose the responsible path. And it was fine. It was the right choice by most measures. But later, in the quiet, you felt the absence of the other path. Not regret, but a kind of knowing. A recognition that you'd chosen the version of yourself that fits, that matches, that doesn't cause ripples. And you let the other version recede a little more. That's the thing about choices. They don't just decide the moment. They decide the direction. They decide which version of yourself you're feeding and which one you're starving. And you've been feeding the responsible version, the smooth version, the version that sends the wave emoji and makes the sensible choice. And the other version, the one that would have taken the quieter path, that would have sent the real message, that would have persisted through the discomfort, that one has been getting less air, less light, less chance to grow. And you can feel it sometimes, the difference in size. The responsible version has gotten bigger, more practiced, more automatic. The other version is still there, but it's smaller, speaks more softly, takes more effort to hear. And the question of pride, in the late quiet, becomes a question of which version you're becoming. Or maybe it's a question of whether you're becoming one version at the expense of the other, or whether there's a way to let them both exist, to let them negotiate, to let the shape of who you are be the shape of that negotiation. You think about a pattern from earlier in your life, a way you used to be more direct, more willing to say the thing that might land wrong, more willing to sit in the discomfort of not being understood, of being misunderstood, of having the conversation go somewhere unpredictable. You remember a specific instance, the details vague now, but the feeling clear. You'd said something that landed hard. There was a silence after, a silence you didn't fill, and then the other person spoke, and the conversation shifted into something deeper than it would have been if you'd smoothed it over. And you remember walking away from that feeling satisfied. Not because you'd won anything, but because you'd stayed in the real. You hadn't retreated. And you compare that to now. The way you're quicker to smooth, quicker to fill the silence, quicker to say never mind or it's fine or I didn't mean it like that. And you wonder when that shift happened. Not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of moments where smoothing was easier, where staying in the real felt like too much, where the cost of being misunderstood seemed higher than the cost of being understood. And you wonder if that's what becoming is. The accumulation of these small decisions until the shape you're in is the shape you've chosen, even if you didn't know you were choosing it. There's a phrase that comes to mind, something you read once, something about how we are what we do repeatedly, not what we intend, not what we hope, not what we imagine ourselves to be. What we do, over and over, the actions that become patterns, the patterns that become habits, the habits that become the architecture of a life. And you look at your own architecture in this quiet, and you see the small repeated actions, the messages you don't send, the invitations you decline with reasons that aren't the reasons, the times you choose the smooth answer over the real one, the times you let the drift take you rather than steering back. And you see the shape forming, and you ask yourself, is this the shape you want? And the answer isn't simple because the shape has a logic. It has a reason. It's protected you. It's made things easier. It's kept the peace. But you also see the cost, the slow erosion of something you used to value, the distance between the person you thought you'd become and the person you're becoming. And you notice that the person you thought you'd become is not a grand figure, not someone famous or accomplished, just someone more whole, more present, more willing to be seen. And you feel the ache of that distance not as a sharp pain, but as a low, continuous hum. You think about a moment earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday. The days blend in a way that makes it hard to pin. You were in a group and someone asked a question that could have gone deep. It was a question about something personal, something that matters. And you saw the opening. You felt the invitation to say something real. And you paused. And in the pause, you looked around the group and you did a quick calculation. Who was there? What the energy was? Whether the moment was right. And you decided it wasn't. Or you decided you didn't want to be the one to change the energy. So you said something that was true but partial. Something that answered the question without opening the door. And the conversation moved on. And you felt, in the aftermath, a small sense of relief. And a small sense of loss. And you've been carrying that loss, not heavily, but present. Like a stone in your pocket that you keep touching without taking out. And you wonder what would have happened if you'd said the real thing. If you'd let the energy change. If you'd let the conversation go somewhere unpredictable. And you don't know. You'll never know. Because you chose the smooth path. And that choice, like all the others, is now part of the architecture. Part of the shape. But you also notice something else. A thread of hope, maybe, or just a recognition that the awareness itself is something. That noticing the pattern, feeling the loss, touching the stone in your pocket, that's not nothing. That's a kind of staying, a kind of not running. And maybe that's where the pride lives, if it lives anywhere. Not in the perfection of the choices, but in the willingness to sit with them. To look at the shape you're forming and not look away. To feel the ache and not reach for the phone. To let the question be there, unanswered, and to let that be enough for now. There's a practice you've heard of, or maybe you read about it. The idea of checking in with yourself at the end of the day. Not to judge, just to notice. What did you do? What did you not do? What was the texture of the day? And you've tried it sometimes. But it's hard to sustain. It's easier to let the days blur, to move from one thing to the next without the pause. But the pause is where the shape becomes visible. The pause is where you see the pattern. And maybe that's what this quiet is. A pause. An involuntary one, maybe, but a pause nonetheless. A chance to see. And what you see tonight is a person who is learning to be smoother, quieter, less demanding of space, less likely to cause ripples. And you see the gains, the ease, the acceptance, the way you move through rooms without friction. And you see the losses, the things you don't say, the connections that stay shallow, the parts of yourself that have gone quiet because you stopped feeding them. And you sit with that. You let it be there. You don't try to fix it or resolve it or decide what to do about it. You just sit. And there's something in that sitting that feels like a small rebellion, a refusal to smooth over the unease, a willingness to let the question hang in the air, unanswered, unsmoothed. And you realize, maybe for the first time, that the answer to, am I proud of the person I'm becoming, isn't a yes or no. It's a process. It's the sitting. It's the noticing. It's the willingness to stay in the gap between who you are and who you want to be, without rushing to close it, without pretending it's not there. You think about another pattern, one that goes back further, a way you used to measure yourself against an idea, a standard you'd set, often too high, and then feel the failure when you didn't meet it. And you've softened that over time. You've learned to lower the bar, to be kinder to yourself, to accept the partial, the imperfect, the unfinished. And that's a kind of growth, you think, a becoming that has moved towards self-compassion. But there's a cost to that too, a risk of accepting too much, of letting the bar get so low that it's no longer a bar at all, of mistaking self-compassion for self-abandonment, of telling yourself it's fine so often that you stop knowing what you actually want, what you actually need, what you actually believe. And you feel the tension of that, the push and pull between the voice that says, be gentle with yourself, and the voice that says, don't let yourself off the hook. And maybe the person you're becoming is someone who holds that tension, who doesn't resolve it, but sits with it, who lets both voices speak and listens and makes the next small choice from that listening. Not perfectly, not consistently, but with awareness, with the stone in the pocket. There was a moment not long ago when you made a choice that surprised you. It was a small thing. You were at a counter or a desk, and you had the opportunity to take credit for something you hadn't done. Not a big thing, a small thing. No one would have known. And you paused, and you felt the pull of the easy path, the path that would have made you look a little better, cost you nothing. And you didn't take it. You corrected the record. You said, actually, that wasn't me. And it was a nothing moment. No one even noticed, probably. But you noticed. You felt the shape of it. The small integrity. The tiny refusal to let the gap widen. And you've been carrying that moment too. Not with pride exactly. More with a kind of relief. A confirmation that the person who corrects the record is still there. That the architecture isn't all smooth surfaces. That there are still rough edges, places where the real thing shows through. And you think about that moment, and you think about the other moments, the ones where you didn't correct, where you let the easy version stand, and you see them all together. The small betrayals and the small integrities. The shape that is neither pure nor corrupt, but human, complicated, layered. And maybe that's the becoming. Not a line from one point to another, but a layering. Palimpsest. The old version's still there underneath, still visible in certain lights. The new version's written over, but not erased. And you can look at the layers and see the choices, the patterns, the things you held and the things you let go. And you can ask, am I proud of this? And the answer might be sometimes yes, sometimes no, and mostly it's too tangled to say. But you can look. You can keep looking. You can keep the question alive, not as a demand, but as a companion. Something that walks with you through the quiet, through the days, through the small choices that become the shape. The room is darker now, or maybe your eyes have adjusted. The quiet is deeper, and you're still here sitting with the question, not running. And that's something. That's not nothing. That's the part of you that persists, even when persistence is hard. The part that sits in the dark and doesn't turn on the light, doesn't pick up the phone, doesn't fill the space with noise. The part that lets the shape be seen. And you think maybe that's the person you're becoming. Not the one who makes all the right choices, but the one who sits with the wrong ones. The one who feels the ache and doesn't smooth it. The one who holds the tension between what is and what could be, and lets that tension be the ground. And you don't know if that's pride, but it feels closer to it than the wave emoji. Feels like something you can carry, something that has weight, but a weight you can bear. You let the thought drift, you let the quiet take it, and you let yourself drift with it, not quite sleeping, not quite awake, just there in the space between. And the question softens to a hum, and the shape of who you're becoming is just a shape, neither good nor bad, just the accumulation of all the small moments, the messages sent and not sent, the laughs that came out too loud, the corrections made and not made. And you're in there somewhere, the real you underneath the layers. And you'll find it again in the next quiet, the next pause, the next moment where you choose to sit instead of run. And that's the becoming. That's the whole of it. Just the next small thing. And the sitting after. Just the next small thing. And the sitting after. And that's where you are now in the sitting after. The day's choices are behind you, whatever they were. And there's a kind of peace in that. A permission to let the shape of the day dissolve into the shape of the night. But your mind doesn't let go completely. It drifts to other shapes, other lives, the lives you catch glimpses of in passing, in the fragments that float up from conversations, from photos you scroll past, from stories told in that offhand way people have when they're describing something that matters to them. There was a moment earlier in the evening. You were on a call, not a long one, and the other person mentioned something they'd done that day. A thing they'd been putting off for a while, and they just did it. They said it simply, "I finally did the thing." And you heard the satisfaction in their voice, the quiet pride. And you felt something rise in response. A kind of warmth for them, genuine but also something else. A small twinge. A comparison that you didn't invite, but that arrived anyway. Because there's a thing you've been putting off too. Not a huge thing. A thing that requires a few steps, a little courage, a little persistence. And you haven't done it. And you don't know when you will. And hearing them say, "I finally did the thing," made you aware, suddenly, of the space between your thing and their thing. Not the size of the thing, but the relationship to it. The way they had moved toward it and the way you have been moving around it. Circling, keeping it in view but not quite facing it. And you wonder, in this quiet, if that's a pattern you can trace. The circling, the way you hold certain things at a distance, not because they're impossible, but because facing them would require a version of yourself that you're not sure you have anymore. Or a version you're not sure you want to be. Or maybe it's just that the energy required feels greater than the energy you have, and you're conserving, and the conservation becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a life. You think about a photo you saw not long ago. Someone you used to know or someone you knew of in a different context. And they were doing something you once imagined yourself doing. Something that required a certain leap, a certain willingness to be uncomfortable. And in the photo, they looked comfortable. Or at least, they looked like they were on the other side of the discomfort. And you looked at the photo, and you felt the familiar pull. The what if. The that could have been me. And then you closed it, and you went on with your day, and you didn't think about it again until now. But now, in the sitting after, you let yourself think about it. Not to wallow, but to understand. To see the comparison for what it is. A mirror that shows you not what you lack, but what you've chosen not to reach for. And you see the reaching in their image, and you see the not reaching in your own life, and you don't judge either, not really, but you notice. You notice the shape of the path they took and the shape of the path you're on, and you ask yourself softly whether the divergence is something you want to address or something you want to accept. There's a particular flavor to these comparisons. It's not envy. Envy is sharper. This is more diffuse. It's the feeling of seeing someone else's clarity and realizing your own is more fogged. Seeing someone else's momentum and feeling the stillness of your own. It's not that you want their life. It's that you want the quality they seem to have. The ability to do the thing, to make the leap, to hold the line. You remember a conversation from a while back with someone you don't see often. They were talking about a change they'd made, a big one. They'd left something that wasn't working, something they'd been in for years, and they'd started something new. And they said something that stuck with you. They said, "I realized I was becoming someone I didn't want to be, and I had to stop before that person was all that was left." And you heard that, and you nodded, and you said something supportive. But later, alone, you turned it over, and you asked yourself, are you becoming someone you don't want to be? And the answer wasn't clear. It was more like you're becoming someone you're not sure about, someone you're still getting to know, someone whose choices are accumulating in a way that doesn't yet have a clear name. And that uncertainty is part of the comparison, too. Seeing others who seem certain, who seem to know who they're becoming and whether they want it. And you sitting in the gray area, the maybe, the not yet known. And you wonder if the gray area is just where you live now, or if it's a transition, a passage, a place you'll eventually leave. And you don't know. You really don't. There was another moment recently, a small one. You were in a group and someone was talking about a practice they have, a morning thing. They do it every day, they said, without fail. And you felt that familiar twinge because you've tried morning things and you've failed at them and you've told yourself it's okay, that mornings are hard, that you're not a morning person. And that's true. But there's also a part of you that hears the everyday without fail and feels a small shame. A sense that you lack something that others have. A discipline, maybe, or just a different relationship to the word every. And you notice in this quiet how often you compare yourself on the axis of consistency. The people who do the thing regularly, who show up, who don't let the drift take them. And you see yourself on the other side of that axis, the side of starts and stops, of intentions that flicker and fade. And you ask yourself, is that just who you are? Is that a trait you accept like eye color or height? Or is it something you could change if you wanted to, if you decided to? And you don't know. But you know you've been asking the question for a long time, and the answer hasn't come, and maybe that's the answer. The not changing, the staying in the pattern. But then you remember a moment not long ago where you did hold. Something you committed to, a small thing, and you did it every day for a stretch. Not a long stretch, but a stretch that felt significant. And you remember how it felt at the end of that stretch. The quiet pride. The sense of having built something, even if it was small. And you remember why you stopped. Not a big reason. Just a day where you were tired and you let yourself off the hook. And then the next day it was easier to let yourself off again. And then the stretch became a memory. And you think about that. The fragility of the holding. How easily it breaks. How hard it is to rebuild. And you compare that to the people you know who seem to have a different relationship to holding, who don't break so easily, or who break and rebuild without the long gap, the hesitation, the circling. And you wonder what that would feel like, to be that kind of person, to have that kind of relationship to your own commitments. There's a specific memory that surfaces. A conversation where you were telling someone about a goal you had, a thing you wanted to do, and they listened and they said, "That sounds great. What's your plan for making sure you do it?" And you remember the pause that followed. The blank, because you didn't have a plan. You had the wanting, the intention, but not the architecture. and you said something vague about finding time, and the conversation moved on, and the thing didn't happen. And you see now, in the quiet, that the question was a gift, an invitation to build the architecture, and you didn't take it. You let it pass, and you became the person who wants things but doesn't build for them. And you see that person in the mirror of others, the ones who do build, who have plans, who say, here's what I'm going to do, and here's how. And you admire it, and you also feel a kind of distance, like it's a language you understand but don't speak fluently, a muscle you have but don't use enough to make strong. You think about a time when you did use it, project a while back that you saw through, from the first spark to the final piece, and you remember the satisfaction of that, the completeness, the way it felt to look at something and know you'd carried it all the way. And you wonder why that feeling doesn't happen more often, why the starts outnumber the finishes, why the folder on your computer has more half-filled things than finished ones. And you wonder if it's a matter of discipline or attention or something deeper, a fear of completion maybe, a fear of what comes after, or a fear of the judgment that comes with putting something fully into the world. There's a pattern you've noticed. You get close to finishing something and you pull back. You let the last steps stretch out. You find other things to do. And you tell yourself you're just being thorough or careful or waiting for the right moment. But underneath, you know there's a part of you that's afraid of what happens when it's done. The exposure, the evaluation, the moment where it's no longer yours alone, but something others can see, can comment on, can decide about. And you protect yourself from that by not finishing, by keeping it in the draft stage, the almost stage, the safe stage. And you see others who finish, who put things out, who let them be seen and judged. And you wonder if they feel the same fear and push through it, or if they don't feel it at all. And you compare your own relationship to finishing with theirs, and you see the difference and you ask yourself, is that something you want to change? Or is it just a different temperament, a different way of being in the world? The quiet holds the question. It doesn't answer. It just holds it. You drift to another comparison, softer this time. The way others seem to hold their identities. The way they say, I'm a writer, or I'm a runner, or I'm someone who values this thing. And you hear the certainty in the words, the ownership, and you think about your own relationship to the words you might use. You're someone who writes sometimes, someone who moves sometimes, someone who values certain things, but not consistently enough to claim them as identity. And you wonder if that's just honesty, or if it's a kind of withholding, a refusal to commit to the identity because committing would mean living up to it, and living up to it would mean more pressure, more expectation, more of the thing you're already avoiding. You think about a conversation where someone asked you, what do you do? And you gave the easy answer, the job title, the thing that fits on a form. And they nodded and the conversation moved on. But there was a part of you that wanted to say something else, something truer, something about the thing you're trying to build, the person you're trying to become. But you didn't. You gave the easy answer, and you became, in that moment, the person who gives the easy answer. And you see others who give the hard answer, who say, I'm trying to do this thing, even if it's not finished, even if it's uncertain. And you admire their courage. And you also feel a kind of envy, maybe, for their willingness to be seen in the middle of something, to be unfinished in public, to let the question hang. There's a specific image that comes to mind, someone you follow not closely, but enough to see the pattern. They post about their process, the failures, the struggles, the moments of doubt, and they do it with a kind of ease, a kind of openness. And you see that, and you think, I could never do that. And you ask yourself why. And the answer comes, because you're protecting something. An image, maybe. A sense of being competent, put together, the person who sends the wave emoji. And the protection has become a habit, and the habit has become a wall, and the wall has become part of who you are. The person who doesn't show the rough parts. The person who keeps the process private. The person who only shows the finished thing, if it ever gets finished. And you wonder if that's a strength or a limitation. There's a kind of dignity in privacy, a kind of integrity in not broadcasting every struggle. But there's also a cost, a loneliness maybe, a sense of carrying things alone that could be carried together, a sense of missing the connection that comes from shared imperfection. You think about a moment where you did share, a long while back. You told someone about a thing you were struggling with, a doubt you had about yourself. And they listened, and they didn't try to fix it. They just said, "Me too." And the relief of that, the sense of not being alone in the struggle. And you remember how that felt, and you wonder why you don't seek it out more often. Why the wave emoji has become the default. Why the "Me too" moments are rarer now. And you realize, in this quiet, that the comparisons you make to others are not just about their achievements or their consistency. They're about their openness, their willingness to be seen in the middle, their willingness to say, "I'm trying" instead of "I'm fine." And you compare your own closedness to their openness, and you feel the gap, and you ask yourself if you want to close it, and you don't have an answer, but you have the question. And the question is something. The question is a thread you can follow, maybe into the next moment, the next small choice. There's a particular kind of comparison that comes up when you think about the people you used to know. The ones from earlier chapters. You don't see them anymore, but you catch glimpses sometimes, through the cracks of social media or through mutual friends. And you see the lives they've built, the directions they've taken, and you measure your own life against those. Not to judge, but to understand. To see where the paths diverged. To see what you chose and what they chose. And you see some who took risks that you didn't. Who moved to new places, started new things, left things behind. And you see some who stayed, who built deep roots, who invested in the same ground year after year. And you see yourself somewhere in the middle. Not the risk taker, not the deep-rooted. Something in between. Someone who has moved, but not far. Someone who has stayed, but not deep. And you wonder if the in-between is a place you chose, or a place you ended up. A compromise between the pull of the new and the comfort of the familiar. And you see others who seem to have chosen more clearly, who seem to know what they want, and you compare your own ambivalence to their clarity, and you feel a kind of wistfulness. Not regret exactly, just a recognition that your path has been shaped by the tension between opposites, and the tension hasn't resolved, and maybe it never will. Maybe the person you're becoming is someone who lives in the tension, who holds the ambivalence, who doesn't need to resolve it. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just another kind of clarity. You think about a conversation you overheard not long ago. Two people talking about a third person, someone you don't know. And one of them said, "They really know who they are." And the other agreed. And you felt a small pang, because you're not sure anyone would say that about you. Not because you're fake, but because you're multiple. Contradictory. The person who sends the wave emoji and the person who wants to send the real message. The person who starts things and the person who lets them fade. The person who corrects the record and the person who lets the easy version stand. And you wonder if knowing who you are requires a kind of reduction, a choosing of one part over another. And you're not sure you want to reduce. You're not sure you want to be the kind of person who can be summed up in a sentence. There's a richness in the multiplicity, even if it's confusing, even if it makes the comparisons harder, because there's no clean line to hold up against someone else's clean line. The quiet deepens. Or maybe you're just settling into it. The comparisons soften. They become less about measurement and more about curiosity. What is it like to be them? What is it like to have that clarity, that consistency, that openness? And you don't need to be them. You just need to know that the possibilities exist, that there are other ways to be, other shapes to become. And your shape, whatever it is still forming, still in the middle, still unfinished. And you think about the people who seem to have it figured out, and you wonder if they're as figured out as they seem, if their clarity is as solid as it appears from the outside, if they, too, have a quiet at the end of the day where they ask themselves the same questions, feel the same doubts, circle the same gaps. And you suspect they do. You suspect everyone does in their own way. That the comparisons you make are comparisons between your inside and someone else's outside. And that's not a fair comparison. That's not a mirror that shows the truth. You remember a moment when someone you admire, someone who seems so put together, said something that revealed a crack, a doubt they'd been carrying, a fear they hadn't shared, and you remember the surprise of it and then the relief, the recognition that they were human too, that their shape had its own layers, its own contradictions, and you remember feeling closer to them in that moment, not because they were perfect, but because they weren't, because they let you see the inside. And you think about that, the gift of seeing someone's inside, and you think about the gift of letting someone see yours, and you wonder if that's part of what you're becoming. Someone who lets the inside show sometimes, who takes the risk of being seen, who closes the gap, not for the sake of pride, but for the sake of connection, for the sake of being real. The sitting after, the quiet where comparisons drift in and then drift out, and you're left with yourself, your own shape, your own contradictions, your own small choices, and you let the comparisons go one by one like leaves on a current. They were there. They told you something about what you notice, what you value, what you wonder about. But they're not the truth of you. The truth of you is in the choices you make, the ones you sit with, the ones you carry into the next moment. And you're sitting with them now in the dark, in the quiet, and that's something. That's the part of you that persists. The part that doesn't compare itself away. The part that stays. The part that stays. And that staying is its own kind of thing, isn't it? The part of you that doesn't get swept away by the comparisons, by the day's demands, by the 1,000 small currents pulling in 1,000 directions. The small, maybe, quiet, but it's there. And in this quiet, it feels like the most real part. The part that's been here all along, underneath the versions you've tried on, the selves you've shown to different rooms. You think about the selves, the way you shift depending on who's in front of you. Not in a dishonest way, more like a tuning. You find the frequency that works, that fits, that makes the interaction smooth. And you've gotten good at it. So good that sometimes you're not sure which frequency is yours. Which one would be playing if no one was listening? There was a moment not long ago, a gathering of some kind, and you found yourself in a conversation with someone you don't know well. And you were doing the thing, the tuning. You were finding the common ground, the easy rhythm, the laugh that matched theirs. And halfway through, you had a strange sensation, a kind of floating, like you were watching yourself from a slight distance, performing the self that fit this particular moment. And you thought, who is this person? Not in a judgmental way, just curiosity. Is this you? Or is this a version you've constructed so many times it's become indistinguishable from you? And you didn't have an answer. You still don't. But you remember the feeling, the slight disorientation of not knowing where the performance ends and the real begins. And you wonder if that's part of becoming. The blurring of the lines. The construction becoming so habitual that it feels like bedrock. You think about a specific interaction, a message exchange, the kind that happens in the small spaces of the day. Someone asked for your opinion on something that matters to them, and you knew what you thought. You felt it clearly, but when you went to type it, you hesitated. You thought about how it might land, whether it might create friction, whether it was worth the friction, and you wrote something that was true but softer, rounded at the edges, a version of your thought that wouldn't catch on anything. And you sent it, and the conversation continued smoothly, and you felt, for a moment, relieved. And then, a beat later, you felt the absence, the unsent, the version of yourself that had the sharper thought, the clearer edge, and let it go. That's a pattern you can trace back through so many moments. The rounding, the softening, the making of yourself into something that fits more easily into the spaces available. And you tell yourself it's maturity, it's learning to pick your battles, it's being considerate of others. And all of that is true, but there's also a loss of the texture you used to have, the willingness to let your thoughts have their shape, even if that shape wasn't smooth. There was a conversation a while back where you didn't soften, where you said the thing with its edges intact, and you remember the silence that followed, the way the other person paused, took it in, considered it, and then they responded with something that had its own edges, and the conversation went somewhere unexpected, somewhere that felt real in a way that the smooth conversations rarely do. And you remember walking away from that feeling a kind of satisfaction, a sense of having been present fully rather than aversion. And you wonder why that doesn't happen more often, why the default is the smooth, the easy, the wave emoji. And you think maybe it's because the real carries risk, the risk of being misunderstood, the risk of causing hurt, the risk of the conversation going somewhere you can't control. And you've learned over time to manage risk, to keep things in a zone where the outcomes are predictable. And in doing so, you've become someone who values predictability, who finds comfort in it, but also someone who misses the unpredictability, the real. You think about a specific moment of not softening. It was small. You were asked if you wanted to join something, a thing you knew you didn't have the capacity for, and instead of saying maybe or I'll see or something that left the door open, you said no. Just no. Clear. Unsoftened. And the person said okay, and the conversation moved on. And you remember the feeling after, the lightness, the sense of having honored your own limit without apology. And you remember thinking, I should do that more. And then you didn't. The next time you said maybe. The time after that you said, I'll try. And the clear no became an exception, not a rule. And you see that pattern too. The moments of clarity that don't stick. The insights that come in the quiet, that feel so true, and then get eroded by the next day, the next request, the next small choice. And you wonder if that's just how it is, that the quiet gives you the truth, and the day takes it away, and the cycle repeats. And the person you're becoming is someone who lives in the cycle, who knows the truth in the quiet but doesn't always carry it into the light. There's a specific memory of a morning. You woke up with a kind of clarity, a sense of something you wanted to change, pattern you wanted to break, and you made a plan. You wrote it down even, and you felt in that morning that you were on the edge of something, a shift, a becoming. And then the day started. The messages came, the demands, the small urgencies, and by the afternoon, the clarity was a distant thing, like a sound you'd heard in a dream, and by the evening you'd forgotten it entirely, until now, until this quiet, where it surfaces again, not as a plan, but as a reminder that the clarity comes and goes, and the real work is in the holding, the staying with it long enough for it to become something more than a morning thought. You think about the things you've held, the long things, the things that have persisted despite the drift. There's a relationship, a handful of them, that have stayed. Not because they're easy, but because you've chosen over and over to stay. To send the message even when it felt late. To make the call even when you were tired. To show up even when showing up was hard. And you look at those relationships, and you see a version of yourself that is different from the one in the smooth conversations. A version that persists, that holds, that doesn't let the drift take everything. And you wonder why that version shows up in some contexts and not others. Why you can hold a relationship but not a practice. Why you can show up for someone but not for the thing you said you wanted to do. And you think maybe it's because the relationship has eyes. There's someone on the other end. Someone who sees you, who expects you, who would notice if you drifted. And the thing, the practice, the project, those don't have eyes. No one's watching. No one will know if you let it fade. And so you let it, and the letting becomes the pattern. There's a specific project you started, something you cared about. You worked on it in the early days with energy, with excitement. You told people about it. They were supportive. And then, somewhere along the way, the energy shifted. The excitement became obligation. The obligation became weight. And you started to avoid it, to put it off, to let other things fill the space where it used to live. And now it sits half done in the corner of your mind, and you think about it sometimes and you feel a kind of shame. Not because it's not done, but because you let it become the thing you avoid. The thing that reminds you of your own capacity for starting and not finishing. And you compare that to the relationships you've held. The ones where you didn't let the drift win. And you wonder what the difference is. Why you could hold those but not this. And you think maybe it's the stakes. The relationship has consequences that matter to you. The project, in the end, only matters to you. And you've learned, somewhere along the way, that your own stakes are easier to let go of than someone else's. That you'll show up for others in ways you won't show up for yourself. That's a hard thing to sit with. The recognition that you treat yourself with less commitment than you treat others. That the promises you make to yourself are the ones you break first. And you see that pattern across so many areas. The morning routine you abandon. The boundary you let slide. The thing you said you'd do for yourself that you never got around to. And you ask yourself in this quiet why that is. Why the self gets the leftovers. Why the wave emoji is for you too. There's a memory of a conversation with someone who was talking about self-trust. They said, I want to be someone who does what I say I'm going to do, even when no one's watching. And you remember nodding because it resonated. And then you remember thinking, I'm not that person. Not consistently. I'm someone who does what I say when there's accountability, and lets it slide when there isn't. And you felt a kind of disappointment in that recognition. A sense that you'd let something important atrophy. The muscle of self-commitment. And you think about that muscle. How it gets stronger with use, weaker with neglect. And you think about the times you've used it, the times you've held a commitment to yourself and how good it felt. The quiet satisfaction of doing what you said you'd do, even though no one would know if you didn't. And you think about how rare those moments have become. How the path of least resistance has become the well-worn path, and the path of self-commitment has grown over barely visible. There was a specific morning, a while back, where you did something you'd been meaning to do for yourself. A small thing. You woke up and you did it before anything else. And you remember the feeling of that. The way it set the tone for the day. The way it felt like a small victory, not over anyone else, but over the drift. And you remember thinking, this is how it starts. One morning, one small thing, and then the next day you didn't do it. And the day after, you told yourself you'd get back to it. And then the memory of that morning became a nice memory, not a practice. And you became someone who has nice memories of doing things, rather than someone who does them. You think about the person you're becoming in relation to that. Someone who remembers the good intentions more than the follow-through. Someone whose identity is built on the starts, not the finishes. And you ask yourself if that's a kind of dishonesty. A way of telling yourself a story about who you are that the facts don't fully support. And you don't know, but you know you're aware of it now in this quiet in a way you're not always. And awareness maybe is the first step, or maybe it's just another start. Another thing you'll remember doing one night in the quiet. There's a particular texture to these thoughts, a softness. They're not accusations. They're more like observations. The kind you make when you're looking at something you've made, not to judge it, but to understand it. The shape of it, the materials, the places where it's strong and the places where it's thin. And you're looking at the shape of your own commitment, your own follow-through, and you're seeing the thin places. The places where you've let things go. The places where you've shown up for others more than yourself. And you think about a pattern you've noticed in others. The ones who seem to have a different relationship to self-commitment. They do the thing in the morning, the thing they said they'd do, and they don't make a big deal of it. It's just part of their day. And you wonder if that's the difference. They don't see it as a choice. They see it as part of who they are. The identity and the action are the same. And for you, there's a gap. A space between the identity you imagine and the actions you take. And you wonder how to close that gap. Or if it ever closes. Or if it's always there, a space you're aware of, and the awareness is the work. You remember a moment where you did close it. A short stretch, maybe a week, where you did the thing every day. The same thing. The small commitment. And by the end of the week, it was starting to feel natural. Less like a choice, more like a rhythm. And you remember thinking, this is it. This is how it becomes part of you. And then you missed a day. And the rhythm broke. And you told yourself you'd start again tomorrow. And tomorrow came and you didn't. And the rhythm didn't come back. And you became, again, someone who had a nice week once. You think about that week. The feeling of it. The quiet pride. The sense of having done something for yourself that you said you'd do. And you think about the day it broke. What happened that day. Not a big thing. Just a day where you were tired and you let yourself off the hook, and then the hook was gone. And you wonder what would have happened if you'd done it anyway. Even tired. If you'd held the line. If you'd become someone who does the thing even when it's hard. Even when no one's watching. Even when the drift is pulling. And you ask yourself in this quiet if that's the person you want to become. And the answer comes slowly, like something surfacing from deep water. Yes. But the yes is soft. It's not a resolution. It's more like a direction, a leaning, a sense of where you'd like the shape to go. And you know that wanting it and being it are different. That the wanting is easy and the being is hard. But the wanting is something. It's the thread. The thing you can hold on to in the quiet. When the day is done. When the choices have been made and you're sitting with them. It's the part that says, I want to be someone who does what I say I'll do. Even when no one's watching. And that wanting, you realize, is part of who you're becoming. Not the only part, but a part. A part that's still there, underneath the smooth surfaces and the wave emojis. A part that wants to be more solid, more reliable, more present to itself. And you don't know if you'll get there. You don't know if the wanting will become doing. But you know it's there. And in this quiet that feels like enough. The wanting is here. The awareness is here. The sitting is here. And you think about the next morning. The morning that will come eventually after this quiet ends. and you think about the small thing you could do. The one thing. Not a resolution, not a plan. Just a small thing. Something you say you'll do and then you do it. For yourself. No one watching. And you hold that thought not as a promise but as a possibility. A thread that could become a rope if you keep pulling it. And you let the thought drift because it's late and the quiet is deep and you don't need to decide anything now. You just need to be here with the wanting, with the awareness, with the shape that's still forming. The shape that's still forming. And that's the thing, isn't it? The forming never stops. You wake up one day and you think, this is who I am now, this is the shape, it's settled. And then something shifts. A conversation lands differently. A thought you've been circling finally comes into focus. A small choice reveals a pattern you hadn't seen before. And the shape changes. Just a little. Just enough to feel. And you realize that the settling was an illusion. That you're always in the middle. Always becoming. You think about a conversation from a while back. You were talking with someone about the idea of being done. Done becoming. Done changing. Done with the uncertainty. And they laughed gently and said, I don't think anyone gets to be done. I think we just get better at being unfinished. And you remember the relief of that. The permission. The sense that the unfinishedness isn't a failure, it's just the condition. And you've carried that with you, not always at the front of your mind, but somewhere underneath. A reminder that the shape is supposed to be shifting. That the question, am I proud of the person I'm becoming, is a question that moves. It doesn't land. It doesn't resolve. It just keeps asking in different keys at different times. There's a specific memory of a night like this one. A quiet, a sitting, and you were thinking about a choice you'd made, a path you'd taken, and you were sure in that moment that you'd made the wrong one. That you'd become someone you didn't want to be. And you sat with that certainty for a while, let it wash over you, let it have its weight. And then, slowly, the certainty began to shift. You started to see the other side of the choice. The reasons you'd made it. The things it had protected. The way it had allowed other things to grow. And by the end of the quiet, the certainty had become a question again. Not resolved, but not settled. Just open. And you realized that's what the quiet does. It opens things. It turns the closed shape back into a process. You think about that now. How the shape you're seeing tonight, the person you're becoming, might look different in another quiet. Might have different edges, different shadows. And you let that be okay. You let the shape be provisional. You let the becoming be unfinished. There's a particular kind of memory that surfaces in these moments. Not a single event, but a feeling. A feeling of being younger, maybe, or just earlier, and looking at the future with a kind of openness. A sense that anything was possible, that you could become anyone, that the shape was wide open. And you remember that feeling, and you compare it to now, and you notice the difference. Not a loss exactly, but a narrowing, a focusing. The shape has become more defined. Some possibilities have closed off. Others have opened, but they're different possibilities. Smaller, maybe, more specific, and you wonder if that's just what time does. It takes the wide open field and turns it into a path. A path you're walking with the trees on either side, and you can't see the whole field anymore, but you can see the ground in front of you. And the ground in front of you is made of the small choices. The ones you're making now. The ones that will narrow the path a little more or widen it, depending. You think about a specific moment of narrowing. A choice you made not long ago that felt like a closing. You said no to something that would have opened a door. A door you'd been looking at for a while. And you said no for good reasons. Good reasons. But in the quiet after, you felt the door close. And you felt the path narrow. And you wondered if you'd made the right choice. and you still wonder sometimes, but you also know that the closing of one door is the opening of another, or at least the focusing of attention on the door you're already in. And the person you're becoming is someone who can say no, who can let a door close, who can live with the narrowing. There was a time when you couldn't, when the possibility of closing a door felt like a kind of death, when you wanted to keep everything open, to preserve every option, to never have to choose because choosing meant losing. And you remember the weight of that, the exhaustion of carrying all those open doors, the way it scattered your attention, kept you from being fully in any one room. And you think about the person you're becoming now who can close a door, who can say no, who can let the path narrow and trust that the path is still a path. That's a kind of pride, maybe, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing you've made a choice and you're living with it, that you're not keeping every door open out of fear, that you're becoming someone who can bear the narrowing. You think about a conversation where someone said, "I envy your ability to focus. You seem to know what you want," and you almost laughed because inside you feel scattered so much of the time. But you also understood what they were seeing, the narrowing, the path that has become defined enough to look like focus from the outside. And you realized that the narrowing is real, that you have, over time, let certain things go, certain possibilities, certain versions of yourself. And what's left is not everything, but it's something. It's a shape. And maybe that's what pride looks like, if it looks like anything. Not the pride of having achieved something, but the pride of having chosen, of having let the field narrow to a path, and walking it even when you're not sure where it leads. There's a particular memory of a day when you felt the narrowing acutely. You were going through something, a box, a drawer, a collection of things from an earlier time, and you found an object that represented a door you'd closed, a thing you'd once wanted, worked toward, believed in, and you held it and you felt the ghost of that wanting, the intensity of it, and you also felt the distance, the way you'd let it go, not because it was wrong, but because it was no longer yours, because the path had turned, and you put the object back or you let it go, and you felt a kind of peace. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace of acceptance. The person you were then had wanted that thing. The person you're becoming doesn't. And that's okay. That's the narrowing. That's the becoming. You think about that now in this quiet. The objects you've let go. The doors you've closed. The versions of yourself that are no longer in rotation. And you feel a kind of tenderness toward them. Not regret. Just recognition. They were real. They were you. And now they're not. And that's the shape. That's the path. And the question of pride in this moment is not about whether you're proud of the version you're becoming. It's about whether you can hold the earlier versions with kindness. Whether you can let them be part of the shape without letting them define it. There's a specific memory of a version you used to be. A version that was more certain, more declarative, more willing to say, "This is who I am," without the softening, the hedging, the wave emoji. And you look at that version now, and you feel a kind of longing. Not because it was better, but because it was simpler. The complexity of now, the layers, the contradictions, the multiple frequencies, they didn't exist then. Or they did, but you weren't aware of them. You were a single line, not a palimpsest. And you wonder if the loss of that simplicity is a loss you mourn, or a gain you've accepted. And you think maybe it's both. That the complexity is richer, but the simplicity was easier. And the person you're becoming is someone who can hold both. Who can miss the simplicity while living in the complexity. You think about a conversation where someone asked you, "Do you miss who you used to be?" And you didn't answer right away. You had to sit with it. And eventually you said, "I miss the ease. I don't miss the blindness." And they nodded, and you both let it sit. And that's the truth, you think. The ease of not seeing the gaps, the patterns, the small betrayals. The blindness that made the path feel simpler, more straightforward. And the cost of that blindness was the shape you couldn't see. And now you see it. And the seeing is hard, sometimes. But it's also the only thing that lets you choose. That lets you close a door with intention, rather than drift through it without noticing. There's a particular quality to this quiet. It's late, or it feels late. The world outside has gone still in that way it does. And you're here with the shape, with the questions, with the versions. And you let your mind drift to the next thing. The morning. The small choices that will come. The messages you'll send or not send. The invitations you'll accept or decline. The moments where you'll have a chance to close the gap or leave it open. And you don't know what you'll do. You don't know if you'll be the person who sends the real message or the wave emoji. You don't know if you'll hold the line or let it slide. You don't know. And that's the becoming, the not knowing, the choosing over and over in the small moments without the certainty of knowing if you're choosing well. You think about a specific morning not long ago where you woke up with a sense of clarity. You knew in that morning what you wanted to do, how you wanted to be, and you did it for a while. For a few hours, you were the person you wanted to become. And then the day wore on and the clarity wore off, and by the evening you were back in the familiar patterns. And you felt that evening a kind of disappointment, a sense that the morning had been a false start. But now, in this quiet, you see it differently. You see that the morning was real. It was you. It was a version of you that exists, even if it doesn't persist. And the question, maybe, is not how to make it persist all the time, but how to make it more available. How to let that version have more room. How to invite it back, not as a visitor, but as a resident. There's a practice you've heard of or read about. The idea of treating yourself like a garden. That some things you plant will grow and some won't. That the soil changes, the light changes, the seasons change. And the work is not to force growth, but to tend. To show up. To water what wants to grow and let go of what doesn't. And you think about that in relation to the versions of yourself. The ones that want to grow. The ones that keep showing up in the quiet. The ones that want more presence, more honesty, more commitment to yourself. And you think about the ones that are fading, the ease of the wave emoji, the comfort of the smooth surface, the habit of letting things slide. And you wonder which ones you're watering, which ones you're letting go. You think about a specific moment of tending, a small choice you made earlier, maybe today, maybe yesterday. You did something for yourself that you'd been putting off. A thing that mattered even if no one else would know. And you remember the feeling of that. The quiet satisfaction. The sense of having watered something. And you think about how that satisfaction is different from the satisfaction of being seen, of getting the response, of having the conversation go smoothly. It's quieter, deeper. It doesn't need an audience. And you think about how that kind of satisfaction has become more important to you over time. Or maybe it's always been important, but you're noticing it more now. The satisfaction of doing the thing for yourself. Of closing the gap between intention and action, even when no one's watching. And you wonder if that's the pride you're looking for. Not the pride of being seen a certain way, but the pride of being true to yourself in the small moments. The pride of watering the parts of yourself that want to grow, even when the growth is slow, even when no one else can see it. And you think about the person you're becoming in relation to that. Someone who tends. Someone who shows up for themselves. Someone who closes the gap, not for applause, but because the gap itself is uncomfortable. Because you want to be whole. Because you want the shape to be yours, not just the shape that fits. There's a particular memory of a time when you felt that wholeness. A day, maybe, or an afternoon, where the different versions of yourself seem to align. Where you said what you meant, did what you said, and felt no gap between the inside and the outside. And you remember the lightness of that, the ease, the way the world seemed clearer, simpler, not because it was, but because you weren't carrying the weight of the unsaid, the undone, the not quite. And you think about that day now, and you wonder what made it possible, what conditions allowed the alignment, and you think maybe it was the small choices leading up to it, the little moments of tending, the gradual closing of the gap, and you think maybe the wholeness isn't a destination, it's a consequence, a result of the small choices made over and over until the shape becomes something you don't have to hold together because it holds itself. You let that thought sit, the idea of the shape holding itself, of the person you're becoming being someone who doesn't have to work so hard to be coherent, because the coherence has become habit. The alignment has become the default, and you know you're not there. You know the gap is still there, the drift is still there, the smoothing is still there. But you also know that you're aware of it, that you're sitting with it, that you're tending in your own small way in these quiet moments. And maybe that's the path. The small choices, the quiet tending, the gradual closing. Not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently enough that the shape starts to shift, starts to become something you recognize, something you might, in another quiet, feel proud of. The room is still, the quiet is deep, and you're still here, sitting with the shape, with the questions, with the versions. And you let yourself drift just a little toward sleep. Not quite there, but close. The edge of the quiet where thoughts become softer, less formed. And you think about the morning and the small thing you might do. The one thing, the seed. And you hold that thought, not tightly, just enough to carry it into the space between waking and sleeping. And you let the shape dissolve, for now, into the dark, knowing it will be there tomorrow and the day after and the quiet after that. And you'll sit with it again, and it will shift, and you'll shift, and that's the becoming, that's the whole of it, just the next small thing, and the sitting after, and the sitting after that, the sitting after that. And the sitting after that is where you are now or somewhere close to it. The quiet has settled into something deeper, something that doesn't ask for anything, doesn't push. It just holds you, and you let it. You let the thoughts come and go, like things floating past on a slow current. Some you reach for, some you let drift. And you notice in this state that the questions feel less urgent. The shape of who you're becoming is still there, but it's softer, less defined, more like a suggestion than a statement. You think about the cycles you've been tracing, the way you come to this place, this quiet, again and again, the way you sit with the same questions, the same patterns, the same small recognitions, and you wonder if that's progress or if it's just the shape of your mind, the way it circles, the way it returns to the same ground, turns it over, finds something new in the familiar. And you think maybe that's what becoming is. Not a line, but a spiral. Coming back to the same places, but each time from a slightly different angle. Seeing the same things, but seeing them differently. There's a specific memory of a spiral. A moment years ago, or what feels like years, where you sat in a quiet like this one and asked yourself the same question. Am I proud of the person I'm becoming? And you remember the answer or the non-answer you gave yourself then. It was different from the one you're giving now. Not because the answer changed, but because the question had a different weight, a different texture. You were a different version of yourself, sitting in a different quiet, and the shape you were looking at was not the shape you're looking at now. And you think about that version, and you feel a kind of tenderness. They were doing their best. They were sitting with what they could. And now you're sitting with what you can. And that's the spiral. That's the continuity underneath the change. You think about a particular night like this one. Not this night, but one from a different chapter. You were in a different room with different light, different sounds outside. And you were thinking about a choice you'd made that felt definitive. A closing of a door. And you remember the weight of that night, the heaviness of the question. And you remember how, eventually, you let the weight go. Not because you answered it, but because you realized you couldn't carry it anymore. You had to set it down and sleep. And you did. And in the morning, the weight was still there, but it was different. Lighter, maybe, or you were stronger. And you carried it through the day and the days after, and eventually it became part of you. Not a weight you carry, but a shape you inhabit. And you think about that now. How the questions that feel so heavy in one quiet become lighter in another. How the shape you're so concerned with tonight will be different tomorrow. Not because you've solved it, but because you've lived another day. Made another set of small choices. Narrowed the path a little more. And the shape will have shifted just slightly in response. And you'll sit with it again, and it will feel familiar but not the same. And that's the spiral. That's the becoming. There's a particular quality to the late quiet that you've come to know. The way it strips things down. The way the day's noise falls away, and you're left with something more basic. More true, maybe, or just more naked. The versions you perform during the day, the smooth surfaces, the tuned frequencies, they fade. And what's left is something rawer, less polished. And you've learned, over time, not to be afraid of that rawness. To let it be there. To let it speak. Because it's in this state that you can see the shape most clearly. Not the shape you present, but the shape that's forming underneath. You think about a conversation from a while back, where someone asked you what you thought about in the late quiet. And you hesitated because it felt too personal, too naked. But you said something about questions, about patterns, about sitting with the shape. And they nodded and they said, I think that's where the real work happens. And you've thought about that. The idea that the real work isn't the doing, the achieving, the visible progress. It's the sitting, the turning over, the letting the shape be seen. And you wonder if that's true, or if it's just something you tell yourself because the sitting is what you're good at. Because the doing, the persisting, the closing of the gap, those are harder. But maybe the sitting is part of it. Maybe you can't close the gap if you can't see it. And the quiet is where you see it. The quiet is where you let it be there, without rushing to smooth it over. There's a specific memory of a time you didn't sit. A time when the quiet was too loud or too heavy, and you filled it. With sound, with scrolling, with anything to avoid the sitting. And you remember the relief of that filling. The way it let you escape the weight. But you also remember the cost. The way the shape became blurrier. The way the questions got pushed down, not answered, just deferred. And you remember coming back to the quiet later, after days of filling, and finding the shape still there, waiting. Not angry, just patient. And you realized that the quiet doesn't go away. It waits. It's always there, underneath the noise. And the choice is whether to meet it or avoid it. And you've learned slowly to meet it, to let it be uncomfortable sometimes, but to stay. You think about that now. The meeting, the staying. You're here, in the quiet, not running. And that feels like something. Not pride, maybe, but something adjacent. A kind of faithfulness. A willingness to show up for yourself in the way that matters most. Not in the performance of self, but in the quiet recognition. The sitting with what is. There's a particular pattern you've noticed in these quiet sittings. A rhythm. You start with something specific. A choice from the day. A message you sent or didn't send. A conversation that left a trace. And you turn it over, look at it from different angles. And then, slowly, the specific fades and you're looking at the pattern behind it. The larger shape. The accumulation. And then, If you stay long enough, the pattern fades too, and you're just there. Just present. No questions, no answers. Just the quiet. And that's where it settles if you let it. The place where the shape stops mattering so much. Where the becoming is just what's happening, not something to evaluate or judge. You remember a night where you reached that place. The questions dissolved. The shape blurred. And you were just there, breathing in the dark with no need to know. And you remember thinking, this is it. This is what I'm becoming. Not a shape, but a presence. A capacity to be here, in the quiet, without needing to resolve anything. And you think about that now, and you wonder if that's the deeper answer to the question. Not whether you're proud of the person you're becoming, but whether you can be present with the becoming. Whether you can let it be a process, not a product. Whether you can sit with the uncertainty and the unfinishedness and let that be enough. There's a specific image that comes to mind. Path in the woods. You're walking it and you're not sure where it leads. And you're not trying to figure it out. You're just walking, feeling the ground under your feet, noticing the light through the trees. And the question of whether you're proud of the path, of the direction, doesn't come up. You're just walking, and you think about that image now, and you realize that's what you want. Not to know, not to be proud, just to walk. To be in the becoming without needing to evaluate it. To let the shape be the shape, and to trust that the walking is enough. But that's hard, isn't it? The not knowing, the not evaluating, the letting go of the need to be proud or not proud, to just be. And you're not there. You're still in the evaluation, still turning the shape over, looking for something to hold on to. But you can see the possibility, the place where the evaluation falls away, and you think maybe that's the direction, not toward pride, but toward presence, toward the ability to sit with the becoming without needing it to be anything other than what it is. You think about a conversation where someone said, I don't want to be proud of myself. I just want to be at peace with myself. And you remember nodding because it resonated. The peace, the quiet acceptance, the place where the questions stop pressing. And you think about that now, and you realize that's what you're reaching for in these quiet moments. Not an answer, but a peace. A way to be with the shape, with the choices, with the gaps, without the constant evaluation. A way to let the becoming be what it is and to be okay with that. There's a particular memory of a moment of peace. You were doing something ordinary, washing a dish maybe, or waiting for water to boil, and there was no thought, no evaluation, no question, just the action, the present. And you remember the relief of that, the way the mind stopped its circling. And you think about that now, and you wonder if those moments are the real becoming. The moments where you're not thinking about who you're becoming, because you're just being, just living, just letting the shape form itself without interference. And you think about the gap between those moments and this one, the gap where the questions live. And you wonder if the gap will ever close, if the peace will ever be the default, not the exception. And you don't know, but you know that the peace is there sometimes, that you've felt it, and that's something, that's a thread you can follow. You let your mind drift to the morning that will come, and you think about the possibility of carrying some of this quiet into it, the presence, the acceptance, the willingness to let the shape be what it is without needing to evaluate it. And you know it won't be that way. The day will bring its noise, its demands, its small choices that pull you back into evaluation. But you also know that the quiet will be here again, tonight or another night, waiting, and you'll come back, and you'll sit, and you'll turn the shape over, and maybe slowly, the gap between the quiet and the day will narrow. The peace will start to seep into the doing. The becoming will become something you live, not something you think about. There's a specific practice you've heard of, the idea of bringing the awareness of the quiet into the ordinary moments, the dishwashing, the waiting, the small pauses between things. And you've tried it sometimes. You've remembered in the middle of something to come back to the breath, to the present, to the shape that's forming without your interference. And it's hard. The mind wants to circle. The evaluation wants to start. But sometimes you catch it. You catch yourself before the spiral. And you let it go. And you're just there in the ordinary moment being. And you think about that now, and you realize that those small catches are the real work. Not the big resolutions, not the dramatic shifts. Just the small moments of presence. The returning. The sitting even in the middle of the doing. You think about a specific moment from earlier today, or maybe yesterday. You were in the middle of something, and you felt the familiar pull of the evaluation. The am I doing this right? Am I being the right person? Am I becoming who I want to become? And you caught it. You noticed the pull and you let it go. Not because you had an answer, but because you recognized that the question wasn't helping. That it was pulling you out of the moment into the spiral. And you came back to what you were doing. And the moment passed. And you didn't resolve anything. But you were present. And that felt in that moment like enough. And you think about that now and you realize that's the practice. The returning. The noticing. The letting go of the need to know. And maybe that's the person you're becoming. Someone who can be present with the becoming without needing to evaluate it. Someone who can sit in the quiet and let the questions be questions without demanding answers. Someone who can wash a dish, wait for water to boil, send a message, and be there fully without the constant hum of, is this right? Underneath. You let that thought settle, the idea of the hum quieting, the evaluation fading, the shape being what it is without the need to name it as pride or shame or anything else. And you know it's not a switch. It's a slow process, a spiral. You'll come back to these questions again and again. You'll sit with them, turn them over, feel their weight. And slowly, maybe the weight will lessen. Not because you've answered them, but because you've learned to carry them differently. To let them be part of the quiet, not the whole of it. There's a particular image that comes to mind. A stone in a stream. The water flows around it, over it, through it. And the stone is there, solid, but it's not the water. It's not the flow. And you think about that stone and you think about the questions. The am I proud? The am I becoming? The is this the right shape? They're there. They're part of the landscape. But they're not the flow. The flow is the becoming itself. The small choices, the ordinary moments, the sitting, the returning. And you can let the questions be stones, present but not blocking. And you can let yourself be the water, moving, shaping, being shaped, without needing to stop and evaluate every stone. You let that image drift. The stone, the water, the flow. And you let yourself drift with it, toward the edge of sleep, toward the place where the questions soften and the shape blurs. And you're there in the flow, not needing to know. Just being. Just becoming. And that's enough. That's all it needs to be. The quiet holds you. The night holds you. And you let go, for now, of the shape. You let go of the questions. You let go of the need to know if you're proud or not or something in between. You let it all be what it is in this moment, which is nothing more than this. The breath, the dark, the soft presence of yourself, becoming without effort. And you let that be the last thought before sleep takes you. Not a resolution, not an answer, just a letting go, a resting in the becoming, and the quiet and the night and the shape that will be there tomorrow to sit with again. But for now, just this, just the flow, just the sitting after and the after, and the peace of letting it be. The peace of letting it be. And you wake or you drift toward waking, and there's a moment where the quiet is still there. The shape hasn't fully formed yet. The questions haven't returned. There's just the gray light, the soft edges, the feeling of having been somewhere deep. And then, slowly, the day starts to pull. The thoughts begin to stir. The first small choice of the morning presents itself. And you make it or you don't, and the becoming continues. Not with fanfare, not with clarity, just with the next thing. You think about that morning transition, the way the peace of the quiet doesn't always carry into the day, the way the mind, so still in the night, starts to race again. The patterns reassert themselves. The wave emoji gets sent. The smooth answer gets given. And you find yourself, by midday, wondering if the quiet was real, or if it was just a dream, a temporary escape from the weight of the becoming. And you tell yourself that it was real, that it's still there, underneath, that the quiet is not a place you leave, but a place you return to. And you will return, tonight or another night, when the day is done and the noise falls away. There's a specific memory of a morning where the quiet did carry. You woke, and something was different. The usual rush, the usual pull toward the phone, the usual need to fill the space. It wasn't there. You just lay there, in the gray light, and let the morning come to you. And you remember the feeling of that, the unusual ease, the sense that the shape, whatever it was okay, that you didn't need to do anything with it. And you carried that ease into the day, for a while. Through the first coffee, the first conversation, the first small choices. And then somewhere it slipped. The ease became effort. The presence became distraction. And by the afternoon, the morning felt like a memory of someone else's life. And you think about that now, and you wonder if the carrying is the practice. Not the having of the peace, but the returning to it. The noticing when it slips. The gentle reorientation. The willingness to start again in the next moment, the next breath. Not to hold on to the peace so tightly that it breaks, but to let it be there, and let it go and let it come back. Like a wave, like the quiet itself. You think about a conversation from a while back where someone said, "I used to think the goal was to stay in the peace all the time. Now I think the goal is to come back to it more quickly." And you remember nodding because it made sense. The impossibility of constant peace. The inevitability of drift. But the possibility of shorter gaps. Of not spending the whole day in the noise before remembering the quiet. Of catching yourself in the middle of the rush and coming back. Just for a moment. Just to remember, and then going on. And you think about that now, in this quiet that is not quite the night quiet, not quite the morning quiet, but something in between. And you let yourself practice the return. Not to a state, but to a noticing. The shape is there. The questions are there. But so is the breath. So is the room. So is the simple fact of being here in this moment becoming. Not good or bad, just happening. There's a particular texture to this moment. It's not the deep quiet of the late night. It's something lighter, more provisional. The day is not fully here, but it's coming. And you can feel the pull of it. The list of things, the messages to respond to, the choices that will accumulate. And you feel a small resistance, a wanting to hold onto the in-between, to stay in this place where the shape is still soft, still undefined. But you know you can't. The day will come, the choices will be made, and you'll be back in the becoming, whether you're ready or not. You think about a specific morning where you tried to hold onto the in-between. You stayed in bed longer than you needed to. You let the light change. The sounds of the day start without you. And you remember the feeling of that. the slight rebellion, the sense that you were choosing the quiet over the noise. But you also remember the cost, the way the day felt compressed afterward, the way the choices felt heavier because you'd started from a place of resistance rather than acceptance. And you realized eventually that the quiet doesn't need to be held on to. It's always there, even in the middle of the day, even in the middle of the rush. It's underneath. And the practice is not to escape to it, but to find it in the midst. You let that thought settle, the quiet in the midst, the peace that is not a place you go, but a way of being. And you think about the day ahead, the choices that will come, and you wonder if you can carry some of this with you. Not the whole quiet, not the deep peace of the night, just a thread, a reminder, a small space between the thoughts where you can rest for a moment before the next thing. There's a practice you've tried sometimes, a simple one. You set an intention in the morning, not a goal, not a resolution, just a word, something to return to, presence, gentle, return, and you carry it through the day, and when you remember, you come back to it. And sometimes it works. The word surfaces in the middle of something, and you pause, and you breathe, and you come back. And sometimes it doesn't. The day sweeps it away, and you don't remember until the quiet of the evening. And then you think, oh, I forgot. And you start again. And that's the practice, the starting again. You think about that now, and you wonder what word you would choose for today. Not a command, not a demand, just a thread, something to hold on to. And the word that comes is enough. Enough, not in the sense of settling or giving up, but in the sense of letting the shape be what it is without needing it to be more. Enough. The quiet is enough. The becoming is enough. The sitting, the noticing, the returning, enough. And you let that word sit with you in the gray light, in the in-between, and you let it be the thread you carry into the day. There's a specific memory of a time when you used that word. Not long ago, you were in the middle of something, and you felt the familiar pressure. The need to do more, be more, close the gap faster. And you said the word quietly to yourself. Enough, and the pressure eased. Not because the gap closed, but because you let yourself be where you were. And you remember the relief of that, the permission. And you think about that now, and you realize that the word is not a destination. It's a way of being with the destination. A way of letting the becoming be what it is without the constant push to be more, do more, become more. You let the word drift. Enough. And you let yourself drift with it toward the edge of the in-between, toward the day that is waiting. And you know that the questions will come back. The am I proud? The am I becoming? The is this the right shape? They'll come back in the quiet of the night or in the middle of the day, and you'll sit with them and you'll turn them over and you'll feel their weight. But you also know that there's another way, not to answer them but to let them be. To let the questions be stones in the stream, and to let yourself be the water, flowing around them, over them, through them, not stopped, just shaped, and enough. You think about the shape again, the person you're becoming, and you realize in this in-between light that the shape is not something you can hold. It's not a thing you can point to and say, this is it. It's more like a direction, a leaning, a set of tendencies that are always shifting, always responding to the small choices. And the question of pride in this light becomes less about the shape itself and more about the relationship to the shaping. Are you paying attention? Are you sitting with it? Are you letting it be what it is without forcing it into a form that doesn't fit? Are you coming back when you drift and starting again? And you think about that now, and you feel something that might be pride or might just be acceptance. A quiet sense that you're doing what you can. that you're showing up in the ways that matter even when it's hard, that you're sitting with the questions even when they don't have answers, that you're returning again and again to the quiet, to the shape, to the becoming. And that's something. That's not nothing. There's a specific image that comes to mind. A door opening. Not a dramatic door. A small one. A door you didn't know was there. And you're standing in front of it, and you're not sure what's on the other side. But you're not afraid. You're just curious. And you think about that door now, and you realize that the quiet has been opening it slowly over time. The sitting, the noticing, the returning, they've been moving something, shifting something, and you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know who you'll be when you step through, but you know you're closer than you were. And that's the becoming, the slow opening, the gradual shift, the shape that changes not because you force it, but because you let it. You let that image drift. The door, the light behind it, the curiosity, and you let yourself drift with it toward the day that is now fully here, the sounds of the world starting to filter in. And you take the word with you, enough, and you take the thread, and you take the memory of the quiet, the sitting, the shape that is still forming, and you let it be enough, for now, for this moment, for the day ahead, enough. The quiet fades, but it doesn't disappear. It becomes something else. A hum underneath the noise. A space between the thoughts. A place you can return to even in the middle of the doing. And you carry it with you not as a burden, but as a grounding. A reminder that the becoming is not something you have to solve. It's something you live. One choice at a time. One moment at a time. One quiet at a time, and you let that be enough, and you let yourself be enough. Not perfect, not finished, just here, just becoming, just sitting sometimes and walking sometimes and coming back always to the place where the shape is seen and held and let be. You think about the next quiet, the one that will come tonight or tomorrow or whenever the day releases you, and you know it will be there, waiting, and you'll sit again and the shape will have shifted, and the questions will have new edges, and you'll turn them over and you'll let them be. And that's the rhythm, the spiral, the becoming, and it's enough. It's all it needs to be. It's all it needs to be. And that thought carries you through the day, not constantly, not as a mantra, but as a presence, a soft background. When the messages come, when the choices present themselves, when the old patterns reach for you, there's something underneath. A remembering. Enough. And sometimes you remember in time, and the choice is different. And sometimes you remember after, and you sit with the choice, and it's okay. Because the sitting is part of it. The noticing is part of it. The coming back is the shape. You think about a moment earlier, in the day that's now behind you. You were in a conversation, the kind that moves fast, and someone said something that landed in a way you didn't expect. A comment about you, about who you are, about something they'd observed. And your first reaction was to smooth it, to wave it off, to say, oh, that's not really, or I don't know about that. But you paused. You felt the pause, and you said nothing. You let the comment sit there, in the air, unsmoothed, and the conversation moved on. But you carried that pause with you, the moment of not correcting, not smoothing, just letting it be. And later, in a quieter moment, you turned it over. The comment itself wasn't the thing. The thing was the pause, the choice not to reach for the wave emoji, the easy deflection. You just let it be. And you realized in that turning that the pause was a kind of integrity, a refusal to perform the smooth version, a willingness to let the shape be seen, even if it wasn't the shape you would have chosen to show. You think about that now in the quiet that has returned. The day is done. The light is gone. And you're here with the shape, with the choices, with the small moments that didn't go the way they usually go. And you notice that the shape has a different texture tonight. Softer, maybe, or just more present. The gaps are still there. The smoothing is still there. But there's something else. A small space where the smoothing didn't happen. A small integrity that you held. There's a specific memory from earlier in the day, a message you received. Something that asked for a response, a decision, a positioning. And you typed the easy answer, the one that would close the thread quickly, keep things smooth. And you looked at it, your thumb over the send button. And you paused. And you deleted it. And you typed something else. Something that took longer to write because it was truer. Not harsh, not heavy. Just real. A response that opened the thread a little instead of closing it. And you sent it. And the reply came back, not right away, but when it came, it was different too. Slower. More thoughtful. And you realized that you changed the texture of the exchange just by not reaching for the easy close. And you think about that now, and you feel something that's not pride, but something adjacent. A quiet satisfaction. Not in the outcome, which was small, but in the choice. In the pause. In the decision to let the real thing have its space, even if it took more time, even if it wasn't as smooth. You let that satisfaction sit. You don't hold it too tightly, because you know that tomorrow there will be another message, another choice, and you might not pause. You might send the easy thing, and that's okay. The practice is not perfection. It's the return, the noticing, the small moments where you choose differently, and the sitting with them after. There's a pattern you're starting to see in the accumulation of these small moments. The pauses are becoming more frequent. Not every time, not consistently, but more often. The gap between the impulse to smooth and the choice to be real is getting a little wider. Or maybe you're just noticing it more. The moment where you have a choice, and you know you have a choice, and you can feel the weight of both paths. And sometimes you choose the smooth, and sometimes you choose the real, and either way you're aware. And that awareness, that noticing, is the thing that's growing. Not the perfect choices, the noticing. You think about a conversation from a while back, where someone said, "The goal isn't to become a different person, it's to become more aware of who you already are." And you remember thinking about that. The idea that the becoming is not a transformation, but a revelation. A stripping away of the smoothing, the performing, the wave emojis, until what's left is something simpler. Something that was there all along. And you think about that now, and you wonder if that's what you're doing in these quiet moments. Not building a new shape, but uncovering an old one. The shape that was there before the smoothing became habit. The shape that used to be more present, more unpolished, more real. There's a specific memory of a time when that shape was more visible. Period, maybe, or just a moment where you didn't smooth. Where the real came out without the filter, without the pause. And you remember the vulnerability of that. The exposure. But you also remember the connection. The way the real thing landed, and the other person responded in kind, and there was a depth that the smooth conversations don't have. And you think about that now, and you realize that the smoothing has been a kind of protection. A way to avoid the vulnerability. But the protection has a cost. The depth is shallower. The connection is thinner. And the shape that's left is smooth, but also, in a way, absent. You let that sit. The cost of the smoothing, the protection that becomes a separation. And you think about the small moments of realness you've had, the pauses, the unsmoothed responses, and you see them as a kind of risk. A risk you've been taking more often lately. Not big risks, just small ones. The risk of sending the real message. The risk of letting the comment sit. The risk of not filling the silence. And you think about how those risks have felt. Not comfortable exactly, but not as uncomfortable as you expected. And you realize that the discomfort of being real is different from the discomfort of being smooth. The smooth discomfort is a numbness, a distance. The real discomfort is a presence, a feeling of being alive. And you think about that, and you realize that the real discomfort is worth it, that it's the price of the shape you want. There's a particular moment from not long ago, a gathering of some kind, where you were in a circle of people and the conversation turned to something that mattered, something that could have gone deep, and you felt the familiar impulse to say something light, to keep the energy easy, to not be the one who makes it heavy. But you paused, and you said something real, not heavy, just real, and the conversation shifted. Others said real things, and the circle became something different, something that held more weight but also more presence. And you remember walking away from that feeling a kind of fullness, a sense that you had contributed to something that mattered, not because you were brilliant, but because you were present, because you let the real thing have its space. You think about that now, and you realize that those moments are becoming more common. Not every day, not every conversation, but more often, and you wonder if that's the becoming. Not a new shape, but a more present one. A shape that is willing to be seen, even when it's not smooth. A shape that can hold the weight of the real without smoothing it away. There's a specific conversation you remember from a while back where you were the one who received the real thing. Someone said something to you that was unsmooth it, raw. And you remember the instinct to smooth it, to make it okay, to say something that would take the edge off. But you paused, and you let it be there, and you said, "Thank you for telling me that." And the conversation deepened, and you remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be held. To have someone let your real thing be there, without trying to fix it or smooth it. And you think about that now, and you realize that the ability to hold the real in others is the same as the ability to hold it in yourself. And you're learning both slowly in these small moments. You let that thought drift, the holding, the being held, the shape that is not smooth, but is present. And you think about the day that just passed, and the small moments where you chose differently, and the satisfaction that came with them. Not the satisfaction of achievement, but the satisfaction of alignment. Of the inside and the outside matching a little more closely. Of the gap closing just a fraction. There's a particular quality to this quiet. It's deeper than last night's, or maybe just different. The questions are still there, but they're softer. The shape is still there, but it's less defined. And you realize that you're not turning it over as much. You're just letting it be. Letting the shape be the shape without the constant evaluation. And that feels like progress. Or maybe it's just the natural rhythm. Some nights you turn it over, some nights you let it rest. And both are part of the becoming. You think about the cycles you've traced, the returning to the same ground, the questions that circle, and you realize that the circling is not a failure. It's the form, the spiral that keeps coming back each time from a slightly different angle. And you think about the angle tonight. It's softer, less urgent. The shape is still there, but you're not trying to hold it. You're just aware of it, like a sound in the next room, present but not demanding. There's a specific memory of a night like this one, a while back, where you felt the same softness, the same letting go, and you remember thinking, this is what it feels like to be at peace with the becoming. Not to have it figured out, but to be okay with not having it figured out. And you think about that now, and you realize that the peace is not a destination. It's a state you return to like the quiet, and you're here tonight in that state. Not because you've answered anything, but because you've let the questions be. You let yourself rest in that, the peace of not knowing, the peace of letting the shape be what it is. And you think about the day that will come, and the choices that will come, and the smoothing that will come, and you don't brace against it. You just let it be. The pattern will continue. The spiral will turn. And you'll be here again, in another quiet, sitting with the shape, turning it over or letting it rest. And that's the becoming. That's the whole of it. There's a particular image that comes to mind. A river, seen from above. The way it curves and bends, never straight, never direct, but always moving, always finding its way. And you think about that river and you think about your own path. The curves, the bends, the places where it seems to double back. And you realize that the river doesn't evaluate its path. It doesn't ask if it's proud of its curves. It just flows. And you think about that and you realize that you want to be more like that. Less evaluation, more flow. Less holding onto the shape, more letting it be shaped. You let that image drift. The river, the curves, the flow. And you let yourself drift with it toward the edge of sleep, toward the place where the questions dissolve and the shape blurs. And you're there in the flow, not needing to know. Just being. Just becoming. The quiet holds you. The night holds you, and you let go, for now, of the shape. You let go of the questions. You let go of the need to know if you're proud or not or something in between. You let it all be what it is in this moment, which is nothing more than this. The breath, the dark, the soft presence of yourself, becoming without effort. And you let that be the last thought before sleep takes you. Not a resolution, not an answer. Just a letting go, a resting in the becoming, and the quiet and the night and the shape that will be there tomorrow to sit with again. But for now, just this, just the flow, just the peace of letting it be. And that peace, the letting be, it stays with you in a way it hasn't before. Not as a constant, not as a thing you hold, but as a flavor underneath. The next morning comes, the light different, the sounds of the house settling or waking, and you move through the rituals without the usual pull. The coffee, the window, the first glance at the screen. And there's a message there, one that would have pulled you in before, would have started the small engine of evaluation, the what do they mean, the how should I respond. But this morning you look at it and you let it sit. You don't have to answer right away. You don't have to decide who you are in relation to it. You just let it be there in the inbox, not yet a choice. You think about that later in a different moment. The choice of not choosing yet. The pause that extends itself. And you realize that the pause is a kind of boundary. A small holding of your own space before the world comes in. And you've been doing that more lately. Not letting the messages set the rhythm. Not letting the requests become demands before you've had a chance to breathe. And it's a small thing, but it shifts something. The shape of the morning. The texture of the becoming. There was a specific morning not long ago, or maybe it was this morning. The days have a way of layering, where you woke and instead of reaching for the phone, you lay there. Just lay there with the light coming through the window, with the thoughts that came and went. And you remember the feeling of that, the resistance to the pull, the small victory of staying in your own space for a few more minutes. And you think about that now in the quiet of the evening that has come again, and you realize that those few minutes are part of the shape. The shape that says you get to decide when the day starts. You get to be in your own space before you become the person who responds, who smooths, who fits. You think about a conversation from a while back where someone was talking about the first hour of the day being the most important. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are before the world asks you to be someone else. And you remember nodding, but not really understanding until now. Until these mornings where you've let the pause be longer. Where you've let the quiet of the night extend into the day, just a little before the smoothing begins. And it's not every morning. Some mornings you reach for the phone before you've even opened your eyes. The pull is too strong, the habit too deep. And that's okay. That's the pattern. The spiral. You come back to it the next morning or the morning after. You try again. You let the pause be a little longer, and the shape shifts slowly in the direction of your own space. There's a particular quality to the evenings now, in this stretch of quiet you've been in. The questions are still there, but they're not as loud. The shape is still there, but you're not turning it over with the same intensity. You're just aware of it, like the hum of a refrigerator in the background, present but not demanding. And you realize that the intensity of the earlier nights, the nights where you turned it over and over, was part of the process, the necessary turning. But there's another part, too, the resting, the letting the turned over earth settle. And you're in that part now, the settling. You think about a specific night, maybe a week ago, or what feels like a week, where you sat with the shape and felt nothing but confusion. The layers were too many, the contradictions too sharp, and you couldn't find a thread to hold on to. And you remember the frustration of that, the sense that you were getting nowhere. But now, from this quiet, you see that night differently. It was a turning, a necessary churning, and the clarity you have now, or the softness, is the result of that churning. Not because you solved anything, but because you let the questions be there in their full confusion and you didn't run. You let that settle. The idea that the confusion is part of it. That the nights where you feel lost are not wasted. They're the ground that the clarity grows from. And you think about the nights ahead, the quiet that will come, and you know there will be more confusion, more turning, more nights where the shape feels too tangled to hold. And that's okay. That's the spiral, the turning and the resting, the questions and the peace. And you're learning to be with both. There's a memory of a practice you used to have, or maybe you read about it, the idea of journaling in the morning and the evening. Not to solve anything, just to let the thoughts out. And you did it for a while, and then you stopped, and you've thought about starting again. And you think about that now, in this quiet, and you realize that this is a kind of journaling. The sitting, the turning, the letting the shape be seen. And maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need the paper, the pen. The quiet is the journal. The thoughts are the words. And you're writing it in a way every night. Not for anyone to read, just for yourself, just to let the shape be there. You think about a specific evening, one of these evenings, where you sat and the thoughts were heavy. The weight of the day, the choices you made or didn't make, the small betrayals, the small integrities. And you let them be heavy. You didn't try to lighten them. And you remember that, after a while, the heaviness shifted. Not gone, but different. More diffuse, and you realized that the letting them be heavy was the only way through, that the lightness comes after the heaviness, not before. And you think about that now, and you realize that you're learning to trust that the heaviness is not the end, it's the passage. There's a particular image that comes to mind, a field after rain. The ground is heavy, saturated, but the rain has stopped. And the water is seeping in, doing its work, and eventually the ground will be dry again. But it needs the heaviness. It needs the saturation. And you think about that field, and you think about your own heaviness. The questions, the doubts, the weight of the becoming. And you let it be there. You let it be the rain that saturates the ground. And you trust that the drying will come, that the ground will be richer for it. You let that image drift, the field, the rain, the slow seep, and you let yourself drift with it toward the edge of sleep or toward the edge of the quiet, wherever you are. And you realize that you're not waiting for the answers. You're not waiting for the pride or the clarity or the shape to settle. You're just here in the saturation, in the heaviness, in the peace that comes after the turning. And that's enough. That's where you need to be. There's a specific thing you noticed today, a moment where you laughed, and the laugh was real. Not the too loud laugh that covers something. Just a laugh that came from somewhere genuine. And you remember noticing it in the moment. The sound of it. The way it felt in your chest. And you think about that now, and you realize that those moments are markers. The real laugh. The unguarded response. The moments where the smoothing isn't there. And they're happening more often. Not every day, not in every conversation. But more often. And you're noticing them. And that's part of the shape. The shape that is becoming more present, more unguarded, more real. You think about a conversation earlier where you were asked a question that could have been answered with the wave emoji, the smooth surface. And you paused and you gave a real answer. Not a heavy one, not a confession, just a real one. And the conversation continued, and it was fine. The world didn't end. The other person didn't recoil. And you walked away from that conversation with a small sense of having been yourself. Not the performed self. The one that laughs real laughs and gives real answers. And you think about that now, and you realize that the fear of being real, the fear that it will be too much or not enough or the wrong thing, that fear is less than it used to be. Not gone, but less. And you're learning that the real thing is usually received. Not always, but usually. And the times it's not, that's okay too. Because the real thing is yours. And the response is theirs. And you don't have to smooth it over. There's a particular memory of a time when you gave a real answer and it wasn't received well. The other person changed the subject or looked uncomfortable or gave the smooth response that closed the door. And you remember the sting of that. The sense that you'd made a mistake. But now, from this quiet, you see it differently. You see that the real answer was still the right answer. For you. And the other person's discomfort was theirs. And you don't have to carry it. You don't have to smooth it over for them. You can let it be. You let that sit. The idea of not carrying the discomfort of others. The idea of being real and letting the response be what it is. And you realize that this is part of the shape you're becoming. Someone who can be real without needing to manage the outcome. Someone who can let the real thing land and let it be. You think about the wave emoji again. The symbol that started this in a way. The small choice that represents so many small choices. And you think about it now and you don't judge it. It's a tool. A way of moving through the world. But it's not the only way. And the person you're becoming is someone who uses it less. Who pauses sometimes and sends something else. Who lets the real thing have its space. There's a specific moment from today that you want to hold on to. You were in a line waiting for something, and the person in front of you was taking a long time, and you felt the impatience rise. The familiar itch, and you caught it. You noticed the itch and you let it be there. You didn't act on it. You didn't sigh, or shift your weight, or do the small things that signal impatience. You just waited, and the person finished, and they turned, and they smiled, and you smiled back. And the moment passed, and you think about that now, and you realize that the waiting was a kind of practice. The letting the impatience be there without acting on it. The staying present. And that's part of the shape too. The shape that can wait. That can let things take the time they take. You let that moment settle. The line, the waiting, the smile. And you think about all the small moments like that, the ones that don't make it into the story you tell about your day, but that shape you invisibly over time. The moments where you choose to pause instead of rush, to listen instead of speak, to be real instead of smooth. They accumulate. They become the ground that the shape grows from. There's a particular quality to this quiet that feels like a closing. Not the closing of a door, but the closing of a circle. The questions that were so sharp in the first nights have softened. The shape that felt so tangled has loosened. And you're not sure if you've answered anything, or if you've just learned to hold the questions differently. But it feels like something has shifted, something has settled. You think about the first night of this sitting, the night when the question came to you in the car, after the message with the wave emoji. And you think about all the nights since, the turning, the sitting, the letting be, and you realize that you've been doing something. Not solving, not achieving, but tending to the shape, letting it be seen. And that's the work. That's the becoming. There's a memory of a conversation from a long time ago, or what feels like a long time ago, where someone said, "The only way to become who you are is to keep asking the question. Not to answer it, just to keep it alive." And you remember thinking that was strange, that you wanted the answer. But now, from this quiet, you understand. The question is the becoming. The asking is the shape. And the answer, if it comes, is just a moment. The question is the life. You let that sit. The question as life. The asking as becoming. And you realize that you're not going to stop asking. That there will be other nights, other quiet, other moments where the question surfaces and you turn it over. And that's okay. That's the spiral. That's the path. You think about the person you're becoming, not as a destination, but as a direction, a leaning toward more presence, more realness, more pauses, toward less smoothing, less performing, less wave emojis. And you don't know if you'll get there. You don't know if the direction will hold. But you know that you're moving, that the shape is shifting, and that, in this quiet, in this moment, is enough. The quiet deepens. The night holds you, and you let the shape be what it is. Not perfect, not finished, just here. Just becoming. And you let yourself be here with it. Not asking, not turning, just being. And that's the peace. That's the letting be. And you rest in it for now until the next quiet, the next turning, the next small choice. And that's the becoming. That's the whole of it.